So can you all hear me all right? I have a funny little microphone here.
Yeah.
Well, today is November 6th, 2008, and my subject is Zen meditation. And I might begin by recalling a morning some years ago when a freshman advisor showed up at my office door. And he stood there for a moment looking bewildered. And then he said, where am I going? And I've been asked many questions, is this the basement? Where's the bathroom? But I hadn't been asked that one. So many answers crossed my mind, including the grave that awaits us all. It turned out, though, that he didn't know what his schedule was, and so he was going to Sidon 229 for English 101. But that story calls to mind a much older story from the 8th century China, where a Zen, or at that time called Shan practitioner, was headed off on pilgrimage with his straw hat and his staff and his sandals. And the Zen master who encountered him on the path said, where are you going? And he said, I don't know. And the master said, good. He said, not knowing is the most intimate. And there are many interpretations of that story, but what it's about, I think, is that our preconceptions often get in the way of our direct encounter with experience. Our unmediated encounter, unmediated inquiry is impeded by what comes before, which is our misconceptions or preconceptions. But what if the object of knowledge is Zen itself? We're asking, what is Zen? And what if the questioner is a Westerner? Because Zen, after all, comes from another culture. And it seems to me that Zen is itself in a peculiar position because it's on one hand very familiar and very strange. It's strange in the sense that it's Eastern. It seems to many people to be alien or foreign, paradoxical, and to many intimidating. Its austerities, its aesthetic reputation. But it's also very familiar in the sense that it's part of popular culture. If you watch The Daily Show from time to time, you may note at the end of it a moment of Zen, which is usually a short piece of video footage in which something weird occurs. And also, Zen is used quite often in the phrase Zen-like, a Zen-like serenity or something like that, a Zen-like question. And it's also part of advertising. So it's used to describe decor or style. I was reading once through, I should say flipping through one of my wife's yoga catalogs once, and I came upon a Zen top, which turned out to be a tank top, which was available in marmalade, tangerine, and other unignorable colors. And I mention those because those are parts of the stereotypes of Zen which actually impede our understanding of it. Zen practice is not something weird, which you do when you're a little off the rocker. It's rather a way of regaining your groundedness, your balance, your clarity. And the Zen top is just about the last thing you would wear in a monastery. So I thought that as a long-time practitioner and someone who's had the benefit of about 20 years of experience and training, I might contribute to an understanding of the practice by writing a column for our local newspaper, the Alfred Sun. And I was encouraged in this effort by my friend, my late friend, Cheryl Birdie, C.B., who himself wrote a column for 2.5 years for the Alfred Sun. I read many of them before they came out. And I was also drawn to the column as a genre, as a literary genre. I liked its concentration, its brevity, its elasticity, and especially the way it's embedded in time. It's embedded in the everyday life and the passing moment. And so, with all that in mind, I began writing columns in January. And I would like to read just a handful of them to you today, and perhaps talk a little bit about them, and then we can have some questions and discussion. The first column came out on January 31st of this year. As some readers of The Sun may know, I have led a Zen sitting group here in Alfred, New York for the past 9 years. Every Sunday evening at 7:30, we meet in the Miller Performing Arts Center to practice seated and walking meditation. Over the past decade, our participants have included students, faculty, staff, and members of the wider community. One evening, a member of our group arrived early, looking impatient to begin. "Well," said he, rubbing his hands together, "let's get meditating." As it turned out, Monica Lewinsky was to be interviewed by Barbara Walters at 9 o'clock, and he didn't want to miss a word. Never mind that meditation is supposed to be about stopping and looking, or at least about slowing down. What brought him to the sitting in the first place, one might inquire, and what has brought so many people, young and old, to our sessions over the years? I suspect that some have come out of loneliness, of curiosity, or a desire to find a deeper meaning in their lives. But the root motive is often anxiety, which the Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh has called the endemic illness of Western culture. Anxiety taxes our bodies and erodes our spirits. Anxiety also drives us into the future, even as we fear it. Let's get cracking. Let's get meditating. Zen meditation is not a panacea for anxiety, much less a cure, but it can provide an antidote, a countervailing force in our busy, busy lives. When we practice Zazen or seated meditation, we sit as still and upright as we can, doing nothing but following the flow of our breath and paying attention to whatever is occurring within and without. We note our heartbeats, the tensions in our bodies, the whirring of a fan, the eruption of a voice down the hall. We note a passing thought, an evanescent memory. And we observe those impulses that urge us to keep moving, to get meditating, and hurl us into the future. When we have sat for a while, our swirling thoughts begin to settle, and we experience an uncommon clarity and unwanted concentration. As we stop trying to control our environment, our surroundings present themselves with greater vivacity. We feel more alive, as well as more relaxed. For the reduction of stress, I know of no better means than Zen meditation, and I would urge anyone suffering from anxiety to make a habit of sitting quietly, following the breath for at least 10 minutes a day. But it would be a mistake to think of Zen practice as merely a stress reduction technique or a mode of self-improvement. Nor is it a way of withdrawing from the world. On the contrary, Zen meditation, regularly practiced, teaches us to appreciate our lives just as they are, and it deepens our connection with other people. I intend to say more about these matters in future columns. In the meantime, let's get meditating. I read that column to CD, and because I had listened to most of hers, but it was not her turn now to listen to mine. And she raised a question about the word unwanted and unwanted concentration. You may have noticed that. That's spelled W-O-N-T-E-D. So I find myself stopping to explain it, and I guess see which way. Another thing, though, we discussed was the title for the column. I thought it should have a title, and of course, as you know, columns don't have to have a title, it's kind of old-fashioned convention, but I considered early light, because I get up around 5 every morning and do Zazen, so it seemed appropriate, but then I thought of the dawn's early light, and the stars playing the banner, and the dawn's bursting in air, and so it seemed a little off. I also thought of just this, because that's the essence of practice, just this. But you have to think when you're naming children, what you might be called in the playground, and how the name might be abused, so I dropped that. And I chose the title One Time, One Meeting. And in this column, I explained the title. Several readers have asked me what the title of this column means, and what its meaning has to do with Zen meditation. Let me explain. One time, one meeting is a translation of the Japanese phrase, Ichigo, Ichie, a motto closely associated with the Japanese tea ceremony. Ichigo, Ichie enjoins the hosts and the guests in the tea hut to regard their gathering as unprecedented and unrepeatable. Though governed by custom and tradition, each meeting is unique. Ichigo Ichie is said to have originated with Ii Naosuke, the tea master and chief administrator during the Tokugawa shogunate. Every morning, Naosuke, who had many enemies and feared assassination, made himself a bowl of tea, pronouncing it Ichigo, Ichige, unprecedented and undefeatable. In 1860, Naosuke was indeed assassinated, but the phrase he coined survived him, becoming a motto for students of the way of tea. One time, one meeting is also a motto for students of Zen meditation, but in Zen practice the context extends well beyond the drinking of tea. For in Zen training, we learn to regard all encounters as unprecedented and unrepeatable, however similar they appear. In her essay, There Are No Repetitions, the Zen priest and concert pianist Maureen Stewart puts it this way: we are always at the beginning. It is always the first time. When I play the piano, I often come to a repeat sign. Can the passage be repeated? If I am teaching a piano student and we see a repeat sign, I tell the student that there are no repeats. We return to the beginning of a certain passage, but it's never the same. It's always fresh. At first glance, these assertions may seem to defy common sense. Would that the menus of certain restaurants might be unrepeatable. Would that our waiter putting our food on the table might say something other than, there you go. Would that Garrison Keeler's tone of voice might vary even a little. Or the village siren play a new tune. Same old, we complain. Been there, done that. To the Zen practitioner, however, such dismissals only mask an underlying reality. The menu may not change, but other conditions will, and no two meals will ever be the same. By marshalling such phrases as same old, we strengthen our preconceptions and bolster our sense of security. But we also erect a verbal screen between ourselves and the world before us. To pierce that screen is the task of the Zen practitioner, and to return to the ground of being, where we may experience the world afresh, is the central aim of Zen practice. Sitting still without thought of attainment, we relinquish our preconceptions and renew our attention to whatever is occurring right here, right now. The flow of our breath, the rumble of a truck, the thought of an errand left undone. In so doing, we become aware of our habitual patterns of thought and feeling, our sometimes painful attachments to the past. And we allow the things of this world to reveal themselves as they truly are, vibrant, unprecedented, and unrepeatable. Well, I make reference to the Japanese tea ceremony, and I was reminded of a modern Japanese man who once said about the tea ceremony, he said, Japanese tea ceremony too long. Life too short for the Japanese tea ceremony. But one reason it's quite beautiful, but one reason it's so long is that both host and guests are giving attention to every single detail of the process of serving and drinking tea. And that attention is known in Zen teaching, Buddhist teaching generally, as mindfulness. So in this next column, I endeavor to explain what mindfulness is. About 10 years ago, I wrote a check for $57 to the Village of Water. That's the Village of Water. At the time, I was attempting to pay my water bill. Oblivious of my oversight, I mailed the check, and somehow the village of Alfred managed to cash it. When the bank returned the canceled check, as banks used to do, I discovered my blunder. What was I thinking, I asked myself? Or as my mother would have said, whatever possessed you. The script was neat, the handwriting definitely mine. The check bore my signature, but whoever wrote the Village of Water was miles away at the time, and I had that check in my bulletin board in the kitchen, just in case. However extreme, my error was not uncommon, nor was it peculiar to Professor. Quite possibly, the chickadees at our feeder and the deer who eat our dogwoods live continuously in the present. They have to. But we human beings have the option of being elsewhere, and that elsewhere is often the future or the past. And when we are not revisiting the past or rehearsing the future, we are often absorbed in abstract thought. To return us to the present moment is the first purpose of Zen meditation. The Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh describes the practice in this way. Meditation means you have to be present in the present moment. If the body is here but the mind is wandering elsewhere, in that moment you're not present. You're not present for yourself, and you're not present for your husband, your children, your brothers or sisters, your nation, or your people. That is the opposite of meditation. Being present in the present moment means you are not being imprisoned by the past or sucked up by the future. As Thich Nhat Hanh further explains, being present in the present moment does not preclude reflection, planning, or visionary thought. Rather, it returns the wandering mind, which doesn't know it is wandering, to an awareness of whatever it is up to. In Zen teachings, this capacity for being present is known as mindfulness, and it is an essential component of Zen discipline. Mindfulness may be cultivated in many ways, but at the beginning we can best develop it by sitting still, with our spine straight and the rest of our bodies relaxed. You can try that in one of these chairs. I wish you good luck. Maintaining that posture for 10, 20, or 30 minutes, we bring a gentle, non-judgmental attention to our breath, our feelings, our passing thoughts, our changing states of mind. We become present for ourselves. But can we be present for other people? Beneficial though it is, the mindfulness cultivated in seated meditation is of limited value if it does not extend into our daily lives, where our presence and often our absence profoundly affects others around us. When you walk, Zen teachers tell us, just walk. That admonishment directs us to give undivided attention to the one thing we are doing, be it cooking dinner, or writing a check, or listening to a friend. Mindfulness of this kind grows naturally from the habit of daily sitting, but it may also be practiced by anyone at any time. By way of demonstration, may I suggest that if you are drinking a cup of coffee while you are reading this column, put down your coffee and give full attention to the column. Or better yet, put down the column and give full attention to your coffee. Hold the cup in both hands, as Zen monks do, and inhale the aroma. Contemplate the origin, the history, and the nature of the drink you are about to ingest. Then drink your coffee, giving full attention to its taste. Continue this practice for a week or more, and see what you discover. One of the interesting things about writing these columns is they are really for a local community. So I've had many people stop and say to people who come about what they might have read. And one person in Dallas told me that she had been doing that for the past week, and it extended well beyond drinking her coffee. She was trying to do everything just that way. So I have considered trying to put more instruction in the columns, but I don't want it to become a kind of Dear Abby or the column of Tofu Roshi or something. But one thing I also realized that there can be continuity from one column to the next. Some people are actually reading the column and they may not even speak up 3 weeks later than mine. So I could have some continuity. So in the first column I did mention habitual ways of thinking and feeling. And in this next one I make that the center of attention, habit. Picture, if you will, a horse and rider. The horse is galloping down a road, and the rider is hanging on for dear life. "Where are you going?" calls the man from the side of the road. "I don't know," answers the rider. "Ask the horse." According to Zen teachings, the horse in this story represents the force of habit, or what Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh calls habit energies. Whether we're aware of them or not, those energies drive our lives, even when we're sleeping. They rush us into the future, and we may feel powerless to stop them. In his poem, Habits, the American poet W.S. Merwin acknowledges as much. Even in the middle of the night, he writes of his habits, they are handing me around. I suspect that most of us are familiar with that experience. In my own case, I recall a Saturday afternoon when I found myself headed toward Wegmans, though I was supposed to be driving to the Value Home Center to buy some paint. My horse was a 1997 Honda Accord, but the pattern was much the same. Habits may be pleasant, helpful, and productive. They may also protect us or comfort us in a crisis. But habits of mind can dull our sensibilities and distort our perceptions of other people. And in the arts they can harden into stylistic fix and conceptual cliches, impeding the creative spirit. Perhaps that is why Nadia Boulanger, the legendary teacher and composer, once declared that she loved tradition but despised habit. In Zen practice, we do not despise habit or consign it to a mental tradition. We do not try to transcend it. Rather, we sit still, cultivating awareness of our breath, our bodies, our changing mental state. Over time, we may notice that certain patterns of thought and feeling arise again and again. We acknowledge their presence as we might acknowledge bits of songs that come and go. Hello, habit energies, says Thich Nhat Hanh to his own. This is a simple but potent practice, and as it deepens, you may find that the force of our habits diminishes proportionately. Where before there was only the habit, now there is both the habit and our awareness. And as we become ever more mindful, we empower ourselves to form new and more wholesome habits, and to drop those that do us harm. If we continue to cultivate such awareness, we may discover that our habits have roots deeper and broader than the person. They are grounded in our histories, familial and social, and they are fed by contemporary culture. In totalitarian countries, people live with a habit of suspicion. In our own, we are living with a habit of fear, whether its object be sickness, aging, a destitute retirement, or a terrorist attack. Every night, the news and the big pharma ads nourish that habit of feeling. Zen is no remedy for cultural illness, nor is meditation a magic cure for long-term addiction. But if we are diligent, Zen practice can release us from ingrained, corrosive habits of mind. We don't have to drive to Wegmans every Saturday afternoon. We don't have to be afraid. I might mention that the word Zen is actually a transliteration of the Chinese word Chan, which itself is a translation of the word jhana in Sanskrit, which means meditation. So if you say Zen meditation, you're essentially saying meditation. But meditation, Buddhist meditation, which is the broader category, is often divided into two aspects, which are called shamatha, also called samadhi, and vipassana. And vipassana means shamatha means to stop, and vipassana is to look deeply into the present moment once you stop. And these early columns I was working with had mostly to do with stopping, to calming the mind, and to paying attention. The second aspect, though, vipassana, I wanted to try to work with in one of these columns. That's when you look into the reality of the present moment. And when you do that, as particularly in Zen teachings, one of the things you are becoming more aware of is what is called shunyata, which used to be translated as the void. There are many things wrong with that translation. Then it was called nothingness. It's now more often called emptiness. So I tried in this column to explain or talk about what emptiness is. Shelves of books have been written about this, and I tried to do it in 600 words. So this is rather dense, but it's only 4 minutes long. The same length as one of the today I'm writing this column with my Sailor 1911 fountain pen. Its name commemorates the origin of the Sailor Pen Company, which was founded in 1911 by Mr. Kugoro Sakata of Hiroshima, Japan. Having learned about fountain pens from a British sailor, Mr. Sakata started his own company, naming it after his source of inspiration. My Sailor 1911 is plum-colored and sports a gold-plated nib, from which the black ink flows through. A gift from my wife is a pleasure to use and a handsome object in its own right. Yet my pen is also a composite thing, and when I take it apart to clean it, I see that it consists of 4 principal components: nib, cartridge, cap, and barrel. Were I to take those components themselves apart, I would discover that my fountain pen, which feels so stable in my hand, is actually an impermanent aggregate to which the concept fountain pen has been applied. And though it appears independent, it is really a locus of interdependent causes and conditions, including the manufacturers who produced its resin, metal, and ink, the craftsmen who assembled it, and of course Mr. Sakata himself. Far from being a separate entity, my pen might better be seen as an event in the ever-changing web of life. For all its beauty and functionality, it is void of solidity or intrinsic existence. That is no small discovery, and were I to continue my investigation, examining my sailor in 1911 under an electron microscope, I would see that my so-called fountain pen is mostly energy in formless space. I would recognize the formlessness, or what Zen teachings call the emptiness, beneath the form. Through direct experience, I would have verified the core teaching of the Heart Sutra, which is chanted daily in Zen monasteries. Form is no other than emptiness. That sutra informs us, emptiness no other than form. A pen is indeed a pen, but it is also not a pen. And what is true of fountain pens is true of all phenomena, ourselves included. To examine the world and the self in this fashion might seem a rather negative, if not destructive, enterprise. But in practice it is quite the opposite. It is nurturing as it is liberating. In his book, A New Earth, Eckhart Tolle explains, once you realize and accept that all structures are unstable, even the seemingly solid material ones, peace arises within you. This is because the recognition of the impermanence of all forms awakens you to the dimension of the formless within yourself, that which is beyond death. In Zen teachings, what Tolle describes as the dimension of the formless is usually called the absolute dimension. It is contrasted with a relative dimension where a pen is a pen and a boat is a boat. In Zen training, we are enjoined to see all things, including our bodies, thoughts, and feelings, from both perspectives. We cultivate a kind of binocular vision, seeing the changing and the changeless, the relative and the absolute, as two sides of a single coin. By so doing, we loosen our anxious clinging to things, including our bodies, thoughts, and feelings. And so we cultivate a kind of binocular vision, seeing the changing and the changeless, the relative and the absolute as two sides of a single coin. By so doing, we loosen our anxious attachments to things and thoughts and feelings, having recognized that ultimately there is nothing solid to be attached to, or any need to be attached. And if peace arises, as it often does, it is because at long last we are seeing things as they are. But it's been interesting to find copies of the Alfred Sun in various local places. For instance, I went to get my car repaired, and there was the Alfred Sun with my little column in it on the counter. Or once in the terracotta, where I discovered food particles on top of it, which I guess is a sign that it's been read. So I decided to write about that, and not only the column in the paper, but the paper itself, I think, of the everyday world. If you have been reading this column, perhaps you have noticed that it sometimes appears across from the classified ads. Perhaps this has given you pause. Zen is a meditative tradition of high purpose and great antiquity. What is a column on Zen doing across from an ad for Happy Jack skin balm? Happy Jack, quote, promotes healing and hair growth on dogs and cats without steroids. Zen is a late flowering of an even older spiritual tradition whose foundational principles are known as the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. What is the column on Zen doing across from an ad for brown septic systems? Septic tanks pumped, repairs and installations, Visa and MasterCard. Septic. Zen is concerned with the interdependence of all living beings, the impermanence of all conditioned things, and the suffering caused by fundamental ignorance of reality. It is especially concerned with the great matter of life and death. What is the column on Zen doing across from ads for a floral patterned love seat priced $350? I Love Alfred bumper stickers for $1.50 each, and power scooters at, quote, absolutely no cost to you. Nothing, one might say. If this column ends up across from the classifieds, it's because the editor of this paper, who was kind enough to include the column in the first place, had to put it somewhere. A more accurate answer, however, is that Zen has everything to do with the classifieds, or more broadly, with the mundane business of daily life. For unless one chooses to renounce our materialistic culture and become a monk or nun, Zen practice must somehow be integrated with a world where cats and dogs develop allergies, septic tanks need to be pumped, and love seats are bought and sold. To be sure, meditative training is traditionally conducted in tranquil surroundings, where the lights are dim and the distractions few. Sitting quietly in the zendo, or perhaps at home in a space reserved for meditation, we settle into stillness. We learn to rest in simple presence, or what Zen calls the clear open sky of awareness. Thoughts cross our minds, but if we do not pursue them, they pass like clouds in the clear open sky. And when our sitting ends, we return to our lives feeling cleansed and refreshed. Such respites nourish us, and they are not to be discounted. But the deeper value and the higher challenge of meditative practice lies in the integration of our experience in meditation with our experience of everyday life. With practice and proper training, we can learn to quiet our minds. We can learn to be still. But with patience and persistence, we can also learn to maintain stillness in the midst of external hubbub and meditative awareness in the midst of emotional turmoil. In his new book, The Wise Heart, Jack Kornfield reminds us that there are, quote, two distinct dimensions of our life: the ever-changing flow of experiences and that which knows the experiences. Cultivating the latter, we can learn to trust in that which knows, in an awareness that isn't angry when we are angry, or depressed when we're depressed. It is merely present, sustaining us through joy and sorrow alike. Within that spacious awareness, pleasant and not so pleasant mind states come and go, as do the cats and dogs, the love seats and power scooters of our quotidian world. Aware of them all, we enlarge our sense of self. Embracing them all, we renew our connection with life. So I'd like to read one more column, which appears in today's Altered Sun. This came out today, so if you'd like to read the text, you can find it there. But it refers to a talk given by a certain nationally known philosopher from this very podium not long ago. Not long ago, Dr. Amos Westacott, professor of philosophy at Alfred University, gave a thought-provoking talk at the Bergen Forum. His subject was snobbery, which he defined in this way: believing without sufficient justification that you are superior to another person in certain respects because you are associated with some group that places you above them in a social hierarchy. Professor Westacott went on to explore this definition and to suggest that snobbery, so defined, may be unavoidable. As definitions go, Professor Westacott strikes me as sound and useful. At the same time, it points towards something deeper than social snobbery. From the standpoint of Zen teachings, it identifies a fundamental ignorance of reality and a root cause of human suffering. And it also implies a remedy, both for snobbery and its underlying causes. To begin with, the snob as here defined assumes that he or she is a separate, unchanging self. Once a Harvard graduate, always a Harvard graduate. Once a star, always a star. Yet even a moment's reflection reveals that what one calls oneself is anything but permanent or solid. Perhaps our temperaments remain constant from day to day and decade to decade, but our circumstances and identities, social and personal, do not. Today's superior self may be someone else tomorrow. Beyond the impermanence of self, there is also the impermanence of one's ideas. Because an idea has occurred to us, we tend to believe it. And more often than not, we identify with it, calling it my idea, and defending it against detractors. But in reality, the unquestioned ideas that cross our minds, including ideas about ourselves, are no more solid or permanent than the calls at CAWS of crows or the sound of the UPS truck arriving in the driveway. To take them at face value or assume that they reflect reality is to court delusion. Yet even if we acknowledge that both ourselves and our attitudes are subject to change, we may persist in believing ourselves superior because, as Professor Westacott's definition asserts, we are associated with a group that ranks high in the social order. But here again, that belief has feet of play because groups themselves are subject to change and reevaluation. Yesterday's darling, Lehman Brothers, for example, can become tomorrow's pariah. In the current political climate, even Harvard educated has become, in the minds of some, a political liability. Given these realities, and given the unstable foundation on which social snobbery rests, it might seem odd that it continues to exist. Yet continue it does, bringing harm and folly in its wake. Is snobbery in fact unavoidable, a curse intrinsic to human nature? Zen teaching would say no, because the very attribute that makes snobbery delusive, its insubstantial basis, also makes it vulnerable to dissolution. When practicing zazen or seated meditation, we sit still and take note of whatever comes along, including the cause of crows and our notions of social superiority. I've got a Lexus. He's still driving a Ford. Bringing awareness to notions of that kind, we begin to see them for what they are. We begin to see through them. And over time, as our practice strengthens and our awareness deepens, we may recognize our place in the web of life, where no one is solid or separate, superior or inferior, and all depend on one another. Martin Luther King called that the inescapable method of mutuality. Phrase came to mind just yesterday. Well, that column was the 20th I've written so far, and I might say that I intend to continue with these columns for as long as the impulse lasts, and eventually collect them in a little book that I hope will be useful to someone who is undertaking the practice of Zen. And what direction they'll take, I don't know. I'm like the advisor who showed in my office. Maybe it's better that I don't. But I hope that the columns have been of use or will be of use to anyone who wishes to become intimate with Zen. And of course, the best way to do that is to practice it yourself. And I certainly want to welcome anyone who would like to practice to come on Sunday evenings and sit with us for an hour. For an hour of stillness and silence. You're welcome to do that. But you may also prefer to practice on your own. Either way, I would urge you to do it sooner rather than later. And in that spirit, I'd like to conclude with what is called an evening gata, or verse, which you'll find in many agendas. This translation can be found in the doorway of the Zen Center of New York City. Let me respectfully remind you, life and death are of supreme importance. Time passes swiftly, and opportunity is lost. Each of us should strive to awaken. Take heed. Do not squander it. Thank you.